and MRL tolerance exemption. Plus, it's non-toxic to your beneficial insects. Goodbye Pest, Hello Venerate XE. Get yours today. Visit goodbyepests.com. That's goodbyepests.com. Or call your local supplier.
Randall Wiseman, Southeast AgNet.
Attention passengers for Flight 1370. The plane has been delayed at its departure point and will be at least 2 hours late. We apologize for any inconvenience.
Are you serious? It took us over an hour to get here, 2 hours going through security and getting our tickets, and now we have to wait another 2 hours.
Yeah, it's beautiful here, but we're inside this overcrowded airport all day because the plane is stuck in bad weather.
This is the last time we ever do this. When we get back, we're going to Ocala Aviation and getting our pilot's license.
Yeah, we've been talking about that long enough. It's about time we did it. Then we could just fly ourselves and never have to deal with this mess again.
Right. No long lines, no full body groping security, no baggage checks.
Not to mention never losing your luggage. Remind me again why we haven't done that?
Well, we're idiots.
Oh, right.
Attention all passengers for Flight 1370. It looks like the plane is going to be delayed a little bit longer. The airline has lost the pilot's luggage. Isn't it time you got your pilot's license? Call Ocala Aviation today. 352-861-7484. That's 352-861-7484. Hey, you've earned it. Call today.
Ocala's information station, 1370 WOCA. Ocala!
All right, 5 minutes after 10 o'clock. Thank you for tuning in. I'm going to tell you real quickly a quick story. When I was a kid, I grew up on Long Island in New York, and out of New York there was a local TV show hosted by a local guy that called himself Officer Joe Bolton. Mm-hmm. And Officer Joe Bolton used to show Three Stooges shows. And one of his sponsors was Silly Putty. So one day, I'm a little kid, I'm watching Officer Joe Bolton, and he's got the Silly Putty thing, and he says, let's pick up a picture. Remember how Silly Putty could take a picture?
Oh, yeah.
Let's take a picture for the newspaper. So he opens up let's get a picture of the Beatles. And so he puts the Silly Putty on the picture of these four guys that I didn't know yet. And he pulls it off, and then he stretches it. And, I'm stretching the Beatles. So I said to my friend Jimmy McCauley, have you heard of the Beatles? He said, where have you been? I was new. I hadn't heard of him. Okay, so anyway, next thing I know, like everybody is loving these four guys called the Beatles. Mm-hmm. And the boys didn't have long enough hair to imitate the Beatles haircut, but the girls did. Yeah. And all of a sudden, the girls were having like these Beatle haircuts in whatever grade I was in, third grade or whatever it was. Okay. Fast forward to the future when one of my friends, and I became a big Beatles fan, easy to probably figure that out. So years later, one of my friends said, did you know John Lennon is living in Greenwich Village? I said, no. He went down to try to meet him, and I think he did. I don't know for a fact. Mm-hmm. Then later on, he moved to the Dakota building, which is eventually where he was shot and killed. But before he died, I went to the Dakota building to try to meet him. And I did not meet him, but he came out of the door, and it was like my brush with fame. John Lennon was one of those people who achieved fame and somehow felt like a friend. You know, you just got the feeling that this guy was somebody you would have gotten along with if you could have spent time with him. Our next guests did spend time with him. Mm-hmm. Leon Wilds and Michael Wilds are on the phone. They're both attorneys. And the one thing I remember from John Lennon's story when I was old enough to finally, because by the time John Lennon was at the Dakota and in the Village, I was already awake. I wasn't awake in third grade. And I remember the green card story when John Lennon finally was able to stay in America. And I remember this whole problem with Richard Nixon, et cetera. And that's what this book is about. The book is called John Lennon versus the USA, the inside story of the most bitterly contested and influential deportation case in United States history. It is written by Leon Wilds with the foreword by Michael Wilds, and they are both on the phone right now. Leon and Michael, what an honor to have you guys. Good morning, sirs.
Morning, our pleasure.
Where are you guys right now?
We're in the same building where John used to call in my dad at 53rd and Madison at 515 Madison Avenue. Dad could have bought the building. We've been practicing here for about 51 years, and he's been doing this for almost 60.
Wow. Michael, according to the book, you also spent time with the Lennons, didn't you?
Yeah, I was a kid at the time. Dad had won the case, and John was supposed to have come to my bar mitzvah during the pendency of the case. The truth be told, it was an iconic time, and we knew that this would have personal resonance. And if you look at the wonderful photos and the anecdotes and the notes that John wrote to Dad that's published in the book, you'll see a time when there was a little more purity, and despite the Nixon administration's handling, how this visionary really endeared himself not only to our family but to America.
So as a kid, we loved the fact that John Lennon lived in New York. I'm guessing most Beatle fans loved the fact that he was nearby, especially if you lived in that area. Why? What was the deal with Richard Nixon? Why was he so adamant about kicking him out?
Well, Richard Nixon was afraid that he might not be reelected in 1972 if John Lennon was physically present in the United States. That was because we lowered the voting age in 1972 from 21 to 18. And of course, Richard Nixon was sending all those boys at that age to Vietnam. Mm-hmm. We had lost something like 50,000 American boys in Vietnam. And although he promised otherwise, he didn't stop the war in Vietnam. And everybody assumed that the young people would vote against him and that John Lennon would somehow or other rile them up and get them all to vote and so on, and that he was dangerous to Richard Nixon's future.
Did both John and Yoko have immigration issues?
Yes, I didn't know it at the time, but for a while, Yoko Ono was a lawful permanent resident of the United States. She had been married to an American citizen and had a child here. And actually, that was the reason they came to visit in 1972. They came to try to get custody or visitation of that child because the child's father had run off with her and hid her out.
That was Tony Cox. Am I remembering the name right? Tony Cox?
That's right. Nobody could figure out how Tony Cox earned a living or managed, because he didn't seem to be doing anything except running away from Yoko Ono. But one way or another, the child, he didn't even use Kyoko, which was the child's name, right, as the child's name, and so nobody knew where that child was.
Yeah, I remember a song Yoko Ono wrote called "Don't Worry, Kyoko, Mommy's only looking for her hand in the snow," or something like that, and I remember asking, "What is this about?" And I was told she doesn't know where her daughter is.
That's right, and it was a terrible thing that went on at the time. And we were lucky enough to have gotten 2 court orders specifying that temporary parenthood was assigned to John and Yoko and visitation to the father. So we had essentially won their case here, and the court would not, the immigration would not allow us to stay here long enough to find Kyoko.
Oh, so she was never found?
So she showed up another, I don't remember how many years it was, but it was at least 10 or 20. She showed up later when she had children, and she realized that it wasn't right not to let a mother know where she was. All these things are in the book.
Oh my gosh.
We have some interesting pictures and documents in there to show that unusual period of time in John and Yoko's life, and how they were pursued by the government. When Nixon realized that it could affect his reelection. He got the FBI and the CIA and everybody on the job, and you'll see things in the book like notes from John to me saying that we're being followed by cars as well as by foot.
Oh, my God.
It was a terrible time to be visiting the United States. And the government just decided that they weren't going to give them more than 1 month to try to finish up their matters, and it was, of course, not possible. We couldn't even find the child at the time.
The fact that
a hallmark of immigration policy and law is family reunification. So this whole thing naively started in John and Yoko's pursuit of finding Kyoko, and then Nixon, as Dad said, saw an opportunity here to control 18 to 20-year-olds, where Lennon had "Give Peace a Chance" as the national anthem against the war effort.
Yeah.
So they came at loggerheads with one another, and that's how it evolved.
I mean, he was probably the loudest spokesperson for peace that we ever have had, and was able to articulate it in musical form, which, of course, often makes a message better heard. I mean, look at the news today. They just inducted, gave a Nobel Peace Prize to Bob Dylan.
Bob Dylan.
Yeah. You know, Michael, the fact that you mentioned earlier that your dad invited John Lennon to your bar mitzvah tells me that maybe it was more than a professional relationship. You guys were friends, weren't you?
Yeah, it's uncanny. Dad physically had no idea who John Lennon was. Dad, tell him the story when you first met.
Oh, really?
When I was first taken to visit John and Yoko, to be considered as to whether or not they wanted to hire me as their lawyer. I said to the young lawyer who invited me, accompanying the iconic manager at the time,
Alan Klein.
Alan Klein.
Okay.
Who wasn't about to allow Lennon to hire somebody if he didn't approve it.
Right.
He took them that night to a meeting, and then Dad had no idea who these bigwigs were. They explained a drug charge that John had, and it was planted narcotics. And eventually my father came up with this masterful plan, came home at night to my mom, who said, "Who were the heavyweights that you were with?" And he goes, "Some guy, Jack Lemmon, and his wife, Yoko Moto." And Newsweek last week put in the cover, they reprinted one of the chapters to the book. It was the ballad of Jack Lemmon and Yoko Moto, you know?
That's too funny.
But you know, to answer
your... over 3 years old.
Yeah, to answer your question, you know, the truth is a friendship evolved. Yoko at the time really endeared herself to my mom. My mom was raising my brother and I, and developed a personal relationship. And Dad with John, you know, John and Dad were talents in their own right. Dad was the leader of the Dad was the leader of the American Immigration Lawyers Association. Had no idea who John Lennon was, but eventually began to take piano lessons. And John then would have my father dress him up for court. And they had all kinds of codes because the FBI was trailing them and listening on phone calls. So my father would speak to his father in Yiddish, thinking that the FBI would have to hire an old Jew to translate the conversations. So the anecdotes and the charm of this time.
How did Yiddish?
Is all recorded in this book.
How did Yiddish sound with a British accent? British Yiddish. I just
no, not to John. He would talk to his own father. The FBI would then have to go see. My father would say John Lennon, and then start talking to his dad in Yiddish.
That's too funny. The book is. Can I ask a legal question about immigration? What exactly does a green card enable you to do? Why is the green card? Why was that so important?
Well, it shows lawful permanent residence rights in the United States. Without a green card, you need some temporary visa that allows you on a temporary basis to work or anything you would like to do. But the green card gives you all those rights. And after you have a green card for 5 years, typically, you can apply for American citizenship if you're a person of good character. And, of course, this is now becoming a hot issue all around the world, and certainly in politics. Everybody's got their view about who should or should not have a green card.
Since this took,
but it's a critical thing.
Since this took about 5 years, as you've expressed in the book, was John Lennon able to still work and make money, and did he file taxes in the United States, or did he do that filing in England?
Actually, he stopped working when his child was born. When his American child, Sean, was born, he gave up his business, and of course, he never gave up his talent, and it was always there. But he gave up the business aspects, had a part-time secretary only, and he raised Sean. Yoko used to go into the business office and do all the business operations.
Wow. Is she still doing the business for the Lennon legacy, for the music and all that?
Yeah.
And she's a dear friend still.
A very talented person herself. And we've had a wonderful... She is exactly my age, and I'm her age. We're about 1 month age difference. And she's a dear friend.
She referred in a matter, Dad, on Friday to the office. She's still sending in people that come within her realm.
Oh, wow.
And we get to see her every so often and develop and maintain that trust. Every time she sees Dad, she credits him for the reason that she and Sean have this beautiful dream in America.
1 week ago, I was standing outside the Dakota. I went with my son, who is now 30, and I showed him and I told him a little bit about how much influence John Lennon had on me, not just musically, because I do music also, but just in general. And Leon, I wanted to tell you something. Years ago, there was a radio host in New York City, and his name was Howard Smith. Not to be confused with Howard K. Smith, who had like a bigger profile, I think, nationally. But locally, there was a guy named Howard Smith, and John Lennon used to appear on his show. And I remember him, and it was not a musical show, it was just talking. And I remember him talking about his lawyer helping him get the green card. So I actually heard some of this years ago, but probably didn't hear all of it.
There were two groups of people that really pushed hard. First, I think cab drivers. You said New York loved having John. The second were the radio casters. You had Scott Muni, who literally ran a campaign, and there were thousands of petitions that were signed and sent into the office that were eventually turned over to the government to let John and Yoko stay. There were campaign buttons. This was really an extreme time. The notion that one of the four Beatles who expressed himself against the war and was literally planted with drugs and was going to then be deported from the United States was unconscionable to the citizens of our nation.
Wow. The book is called John Lennon versus the USA, the inside story of the most bitterly contested and influential deportation case in the United States history. I actually am very fascinated by this because it kind of opens up the doors to so many things I didn't know about this particular case. And it actually tells me something about John Lennon himself.
Mm-hmm.
He was a visionary, and the wit and the anecdotes that evolved in just the normal course. You would think if you're going to face banishment from America, you would be a little more, not humble, but a little more scared. Dad, tell him what happened when they were together and you met the prosecutor for the case.
Early in the case, I decided that from my experience dealing with important performers, that it would be a good idea to bring them in to speak to the prosecuting attorney, who was a big Lennon fan and an old friend of mine. So I thought that would get him off to point where they would feel more comfortable going in before the immigration judge. And in doing so, we were there for almost an hour, and the prosecuting lawyer comes over to me and says, Leon, I really don't think they realize that I'm the prosecuting lawyer in this case. They think I'm just a Lennon fan. So I went over and I said, John, Yoko, I hope you feel more comfortable now, because John Viniciano here is the prosecuting attorney in the case. John Lennon got down on his knees and grabbed a handkerchief from his pocket and started shining the lawyer's shoes. It was unbelievable. He said, "Is there anything else I can do for you, Mr. Shiano?" And with that, we walked into the first hearing.
They have on their home, and still, the Embassy of Newtopia. They, at one press conference, very charmingly took handkerchiefs out and declared themselves ambassadors from Newtopia looking for diplomatic immunity.
I remember that.
And then they put that brass plate on their back of their kitchen door to have a home for it. There was, as they say in Hebrew, there was chen, there was charm in the way they handled themselves in their relationship with my father, with the government, and they never forgot this thing. They would always have Dad and my mom, rest her soul, on a very special list, and there were gifts. Even the year that he passed away, he made sure that we had kosher fishes sent, because he knew we watched what we ate, and so forth.
Oh, that's
and
awesome.
the notes the little anecdotes and notes that he wrote to my father, many of which were published in this work, are really extraordinary. And Dad was able, in the last 45 years, to piddle away on a vacation with a dictaphone machine and built out chapters. And we didn't know years later how relevant this would be, because President Obama relied heavily on the exposure of this deferred action program. Dad had proved in this case, and John wanted Dad to carry the beacon a generation later to show that there are people that the government exercises prosecutorial discretion with. And this case led ultimately to what President Obama did, and there's 700,000 dreamers there. So if you take his song, which is our hold music, and you say they're a dreamer, but I'm not the only one. I'm not the only one, John said. This is his legacy for the next generation, and it wouldn't have happened had Dad and he not put their beautiful minds together.
Oh, that is awesome. You know, in the new movie that Ron Howard just released of the Beatles, I just give me a second to say this. There was a story from here in Florida, apparently, in that movie. I haven't seen the movie, but I saw an interview with Ron Howard. It talks about how the Beatles were scheduled to play in Jacksonville, Florida. They were told that the racial divide would have to be taking place. They didn't want blacks and whites in the same audience. And John Lennon said, "Well, we're not playing then." And they didn't want to lose all that money, the whoever the sponsors were. So they said, "Okay, all right, we'll let him in together."
Yeah.
And so yeah, so I mean, he was ahead of his time. And principled. That's a good word. And it applies itself also to the whole peace movement. That's the part that really blows me away, is the fact that all of this was simply because he was wanting peace. The whole immigration, right?
Yeah, he saw in it, there are a lot of luminaries or stylists or talent now that see this to either deride the public discourse or to get their personal politic. I think everybody kind of trusted that there was a genuineness here, and it didn't seem smart to go to war. It didn't seem the right thing, and there's an absence of a John Lennon that's heartfelt as we face these challenges, whether it's in the Middle East or otherwise now, that there seems to be a deplorable waste of time and money and resource, and we're still calling back to those days. And there are a handful of people out there that have had such an influence on the social culture. Had social media existed in the 70s, I don't think Nixon would have been able to get away with what he did.
Right, absolutely.
But John Lennon needed Leon Wildes. He needed my dad, and my dad understood and brilliantly, if you read the case, used the court system and the different legal tools in ways that were never imagined in order to help this famous Beatle. And, this dialogue now is becoming fodder for films and documentary, even 45 years later, because immigration still remains bantered about mistaken, broken law that America has. Our founding fathers had one vision, and the way they're playing it out is a different one.
I think you're right. The book is called John Lennon versus the USA, December of 1980. My heart was broken because I felt like a friend had died. In your world, a friend did die. I mean, this was a friend of yours.
Absolutely.
Thank you for being on the air with us. Such an honor to be able to speak to both of you gentlemen. The book, do you guys have a website, and what's the best way to get the book?
It's wildslaw.com. That's WILDESLAW.com, and there's wonderful interviews with Dad and historic documents there. To buy the book, you can get it at Barnes & Noble or on Amazon. And there are book events, and if people in the listening audience would like us to have a conversation in their community center, library, or so forth, they should send an email to us as a method to communicate on the website, and we'd be more than honored to bring it to your local library, community, or bookstore.
Outstanding. Michael Wilds, Leon Wilds, thank you both for what you did and are doing, continuing to do. I think it goes way beyond what the surface looks like. But what an honor to have you on our show. It's just too short of an interview. Thank you, guys. Thank you for being with us. We'll take a little break. We'll be right back.
Fox News Radio, I'm Lillian Wu. Donald Trump slamming the New York Times after allegations he sexually harassed women in an article. Trump tweeting out, "The phony story in the failing at New York Times is a total fabrication. In addition to the women in the Times."
There's a People magazine reporter who says that Trump was inappropriate with her in 2005 in Florida. There's a photographer's assistant